Welcome to Pera's Playbook. This is your host, Alex Pera. Let's open up our playbook and see who our guest is. Please enjoy. Welcome to episode 145 of Pera's Playbook. Today I'm joined by Tony McHale. He's a actor and a writer who's he's done a number of projects acting, Coronation Street, A Bridge Too Far, The People That Time Forgot, and he's a writer, probably most known, British television, EastEnders, Holby City, and Casualty. We're going to dive into his career. We're going to try to. We're having technology difficulties here. We're going to see if technology is going to get the best of us or if we can power through. But glad to have Tony here. How are you?
Oh, good to be here, Alex. Let's hope I stay here this time.
Yeah, we're better so far. I don't want to jinx anything, knock on
Yeah,
wood,
well
but
done.
sounds better so far. So, before we got cut off on our first recording, we were talking about growing up acting, and you were kind of talking about how you're doing school plays and some theater and stuff.
Yeah,
So I guess let's go back to that.
yeah. I mean, that's how I started. Actually, was at school. It was one of those things. I was saying that the plays that they did at school, which were only once a year, but the older boys of the school played all the good parts, and because it was an all boys school, then the younger boys were co-opted to play female roles, and I got co-opted to play a female role. And strangely enough, I always remember there was a little bit on my school report, the annual school report you used to get every year, and it would say, geography okay, history not bad, and then it got to English and it said, yes, could be more attentive in class or whatever, makes a very good girl. I thought, oh, this is strange, but I suppose nowadays I could sue them for that, but and we just took it on stride. But that's how I started, and then I got involved in something called the West Riding Youth Theatre. West Riding was an area of the UK that I came from, Yorkshire West Riding, and they had this youth theatre and I got involved with that when I was about 14, 15. And I think I knew pretty soon that that's what I wanted to do. I didn't think I wanted to do anything else. And it was in those days the sort of only really route into the show business world was like being an actor. That was the only route. Nobody talked about being a writer or being a director or any of those things. Acting was the thing to do. So off I went, and that's how I started. I went on to do drama school then, and then from that I joined various repertory theatres and companies uh, as an actor, and slogged away around the country, touring and stuff, doing lots of things. Repertory theatre there was massive in the UK. This was in the early 70s, and to become and this might get a bit boring, a bit technical here, but I know you've got a really strong actors union equity in the US. Well, we have a British equity here, which was a closed shop, and the rules were you had to work 40 weeks in repertory theatre as an actor to get a full membership into the union, into equity, and you could only work in uh, TV, films, and the West End theatre if you had a full equity card. So everybody had to serve this apprenticeship of 40 weeks, and they're limited. You had to get a provisional equity card, and these were very limited. Uh, 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 we're plagued today, obviously. These were very limited in the way you got them from and everything. So that's how everybody sort of started. So it was a very competitive era, really, to get into the business. And it sort of told the men from the boys, as it were, you really had to want to do it because there wasn't any money in it or anything like that. Did it for the long, you know.
Yeah. And not anyone could just say, "Hey, I want to be an actor. I'm just going to walk out there and it's going to be easy." It was like competitive. Everyone's battling for it. Limited
Yeah,
spots available and type thing. When did
yeah,
it change?
yeah. When that changed in the 80s, when the government at the time banned closed shop unions. So you couldn't have a closed shop union. So it meant anybody could do anything.
Yeah.
basically. Which actually, in a way, I didn't mind for other people's jobs, but I think for acting, it was actually rather detrimental. I think it was a better idea to stay as it was. But that ship has sailed, as the saying goes. That's what
Yeah.
I'm
So I was
So
reading online that one of your first professional acting roles was a Guinness commercial in the early 70s.
yeah, that was not one of my first. It was my very first role as I came out of drama school. I am to this day I'm not sure how I got it or where I got it from, but I got casting this Guinness commercial. I ended up in my career as an actor doing I think three or four Guinness commercials, but that was my very first one. And I didn't know anything about filming because everything we learned was about theatre, nothing to do with filming. So it was all a whole brand new world for me. It was fascinating, and also it earned me this money. You used to get royalties, and that was fantastic. Every time it was shot, paid. It was brilliant. I loved it. So
Uh,
yeah, so,
yeah, so we're having technical difficulties here, so we're gonna kind of film in chunks here as the technology lets us, and I'll piece it together at uh at the end after we record. Um, we were talking about Tony's first professional acting credit, which was a Guinness commercial. So we were talking about it, his Guinness commercial, his kind of experience there before we got cut out.
yeah. Sorry, we were talking about the Guinness commercial. Yeah,
Yeah. So did you get
yeah.
any free beer with that?
Yeah, oh, that's right. We got yeah. I mean, that was the. I actually, it's very funny what you remember. We shot it in a pub in North London, and they closed the pub for the day. And it was this, normal filming business and took forever and all that sort of thing. But I was the guy that downed the Guinness, so I was down in this Guinness. I had one line in it, which was "Same again, governor." That was the line. "Same again, governor," and that's all I had. It was all about picking up this girl at the bar and preferring the Guinness to her, or something like that, if I remember rightly. And I got this thing, but I did the line, but it obviously hadn't been recorded well. A bit like our problems with it today. It was a technical recording, so I had to do wild track. And by this time, they'd opened up half of the pub, and they were all sitting there at the other side of this bar where I was sitting on a stool just doing this wild track of this one line, "Same again, governor." And I can remember sitting there and I thinking, by this time, I'd had about 5 or 6 pints of beer, Guinness. So I was well gone. And I was trying to get this line out, and they were telling all these people behind the other side of the bar to be quiet and shut up and all this sort of thing. And they would say, "Quiet now," and they'd go, "Oh, go on, Tony, yeah, cue Tony," and off I'd go again, and I'd fluff the line, and eventually I did get it right, and I went, "Yeah, same again, governor." And there was massive applause from all these people next door, and they spoiled the recording, and I had to do it all over again, but I did get it eventually. But that was
That's
my
funny.
first experience of filming, really.
That's funny. And then it took off from there. You had some other appearances, couple movies that had some big stars in them. That'll Be the Day, Ringo Starr and Keith Moon were in that movie, and then The People That Time Forgot, Patrick Wayne, some major musicians, and then John Wayne's son, who had a tremendous acting career himself. So talk a little bit about some of those roles and that you had.
Well, those were just sort of what I called icing on the cake. At that time, I was sort of mainly doing theatre, and really, you barely survive financially on theatre. So getting whatever role it was, I mean, funny enough, they were talking about the "That'll Be the Day" role. That'll be the day when that came up, which was like, as far as I know, one of the earlier sort of rock and roll sort of type movies. I went up for the lead role. Didn't get the lead role. Another guy got it called David Essex, who went on to be quite well known. And he got the main role, but I got a minor role. I just loved that whole experience of being on a film set. And, it took me a week out of out of theatre, and I managed to sort of get permission. I think we must have been doing rehearsals or something at that time, and they said, "You're right, as long as you catch up when you get back, it'll be okay." And off I went and did it, and that was shot on the Isle of Wight, which was quite fun for me to do, and not a huge role or anything. It was just nice. But the biggest learning curve I think I had of all of those was on a bridge too far, which was a huge movie. If I'm not mistaken, it was actually the biggest movie made at that time. It came in at about, which is amazing, I think about $30 million, which was huge. This was 1976, and everybody was on that movie. Virtually, every star that could walk was on that movie. But the interesting fact for me was I was part of this group of people that took the bridge. So I was out there for like about 3 months or whatever in Holland. We filmed it in Holland. And because there was all these scenes that you didn't have a lot to do in them, but actually you had to appear in them because you were part of the continuity to a certain extent, that you were around the bridge. You were the guys that had held the bridge along with Colonel Frost, who was played by Anthony Hopkins. And we had to be there all the time. But it meant I spent a lot of time on the set. It was directed by Richard Attenborough, who was an incredibly generous sort of chap. And he didn't mind you hanging around or watching. And in fact, I would sit and chat with him about things, about how he approached things. And it would even, in those days, we had daily rushes. So it would invite you to go and see rushes afterwards and everything. So it was, if anything, what was the best thing about that movie was two things. Is I earned a lot of money on it, which was really nice, and I needed it desperately at the time. And then I learned so much about filming. It was such an eye opener and such a learning curve for me, that it was such a fabulous experience to have done. And even though I do very little in the film, I get run over by a tank at some point, but that's another thing. But apart from that, it was just the whole experience of being on that huge, roller coaster of a movie, which I'd never, I'd done. That'll be the day at that stage, and that was an experience in itself. But it was nowhere near as big an experience as a bridge too far.
Yeah,
So
I
they were great. They were great experiences, if anything.
Yeah, I like A Bridge Too Far. I was a big fan of a lot of those old war movies. I'm sure there's not a ton of people, young people my age that, I'd say appreciate some of those classic films, and a lot of people can't handle a 3 hour movie. They get bored.
Yeah,
They can't watch the whole thing. But like you said, the cast is, phenomenal. There's so many wonderful actors, and some of them don't have a lot of screen time. And Elliot Gould and Robert Redford
yeah,
had rather small roles, but
yeah,
they're impactful roles.
yeah,
Like you said, Anthony Hopkins and Michael Caine and Edward Fox. I mean, just Ryan O'Neal. The list goes on and on of
yeah.
tremendous.
Sean Connery and
Yeah,
Laurence Olivier was in it, and
yeah.
it's amazing.
It had to be those movies had to be a tremendous undertaking to task, especially in that time, with the amount of extras and all the equipment they needed. And I mean, nowadays I know, like I talked to somebody that was an extra on Game of Thrones, and they'd have, I don't know, 100 different extras, but then they would use the computer, CGI, and then they'd
Yeah,
multiply it to make it look like, well, you couldn't do that in 1977. You had to have hundreds of extras.
yeah, it was real. You know what I mean? That was the amazing thing. Everything about it was real. The stunts are real. They're not CGI'd. When you see a stuntman fall off a roof, he falls off the roof. You know, it was amazing, and the stunt guys were just fantastic as well. I mean, they must be slightly insane to do it, I think, but it was
Yeah.
great work, and everybody was, amazingly brilliant. There was like I say, Richard Attenborough, but he had Jeffrey Onsworth was the DOP, the director of photography on it. Who I think that was his actual penultimate film. I think he went on to do Test after that with Roman Polanski, and then I think he died shortly after that. But he was great, and he was old fashioned, and he would wait for the right moment. There was this terrific moment when we were all out there waiting for this shot to happen, which was a shot of some tanks coming over the bridge. And we were on a rooftop, about to open fire on the tanks and all that sort of stuff, right? And we were all waiting for it. And I remember we got out there, I don't know, 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. And we were there. We didn't turn over. We didn't do anything till about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And it was all about Jeffrey Unsworth waiting for the light to be right for this thing to happen. And he eventually went out on the bridge. I'll never forget it to this day. And he went out and he got his eyeglass out and he looked at the sun and he turned around to Richard Attenborough and he said, "Yes, I think you can go now, Ricky, as long as you're quick." You know, and and there was tanks and armies and extras and everything happening, and it all happened. And we shot it. And the next day, I did go and see that in rushes. I went, it was a phenomenal shot. If you ever see the film again, it's a shot where the tanks come over the brow of the bridge, and they're almost like prehistoric monsters
Yeah.
appear in this mist. It's quite a brilliant shot. You know what I mean? And you sort
Yeah.
of the quality of these people you're working with. Dave Tomlin, who was a director in his own right, was Richard Attenborough's first AD, first assistant director, and Peter McDonald, who was a great camera operator. They were all brilliant people. In fact, it actually goes back to something Richard Attenborough once said to me. He said, "I don't really know anything about cameras and lenses and things like that. And Dave Tomlin, he does all the big crowd scenes for me. He's really brilliant. But I am very good with actors," he said. But the other thing is I always get the best people I can around me, and I took that with me. I think
Yeah.
when you get the best people you can around you,
Right. No, it's wonderful advice.
Yeah, yeah,
I know
great.
exactly what shot you're talking about too. It is,
Oh,
yeah. I watched the movie a few weeks ago. Um,
amazing.
and yeah, no, you were part of the the one bridge too far in the title,
Yeah,
the one that they couldn't get.
yeah,
The
that's right.
end up having to surrender and
Yeah.
just don't make it. But yeah, that is a very cool shot, especially too. I mean, the technology back then, right? Like, yeah, it had to be perfect. There's so much editing you can do now. Um, I'm
Mm.
sure with lighting and whatnot that you don't need exactly the perfect shot because you can just tweak what you didn't have, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And as you rightly say, you couldn't do it in those days. You just,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, it wasn't long before that. I mean, when I first started working on film and shooting commercials and things like that, is they didn't even have video assist. So the director didn't had to line up the shot with the DOP and the camera operator, and then he had to leave it to them and
yeah,
hope to God they got what he hoped they wanted needed, because he couldn't see it. There was
yeah,
no video to look at because that technology wasn't in place then. And then that came into place and revolutionized, I think, a director's role on set.
right, right. So I reading online, and I always ask because half of what you read online it isn't true. I had somebody on a few weeks ago, and I was talking to him about one of his roles, and he said, "Oh, I never had anything to do with that." It's on your IMDb, and he said, "Oh, I'll have to check that out." So you never know what's true and what's not. But online it said that when you weren't acting you were picking up kind of odd jobs here and there, to make some money and fill the time and whatnot.
Well, yeah, I, I didn't say, but when I was at drama school, the second year of drama school, I actually got married, and uh, we actually had a son on the very, very first day of my first professional acting job in theatre. We had our first child. So there I was in theatre with a wife and a child, and no money. You really got paid a pittance. So you couldn't stop working, if you know what I mean. You
Yeah.
needed to constantly work. And I look back at those times because I did everything. You know, if you name it, I did it. Or if I didn't do it, my wife did it. You know, because we just needed the money. And a lot of that gives you great experience of life, though, that you would miss out on if you didn't do it. Especially, you know, I think it really helped with, you know, my writing over the years because you met so many different people, people of different walks of life that you probably wouldn't met. I mean, in fact, I mean, maybe it's a nice segue. This one is that I was actually loading articulated lorries with meat pies overnight as a job, and which was absolutely great for me because what happened was it meant I could go for auditions during the day, or if I wasn't going for auditions, I could write because I was trying. I just was trying to write at the time or writing at the time, and I got a phone call. This is way before mobile phones. And Jan, my wife, who rang me at work, and she said, "You I just had a call from the BBC." And I said, "Oh, well, what do they want?" She said, "They want to take you out for lunch." Well, nobody had ever taken me out for lunch. That lunch was like, nobody had even taken me out for a coffee, never mind lunch. You know what I mean? So this was like,
Yeah.
you know, what? And that was actually my first writing commission from the BBC. But I was at the time when I got it, I was loading articulated lorries with meat pies. So uh, you know, always kept on doing things, whatever. I thought it was
Yeah.
important. Yeah.
So at what point in your career, doing theater and some film, did you start deciding that you wanted to tap into the writing side?
Well, the funny thing is that I always did write. I just never really saw it as a possible career option, to be honest. It was just something I loved doing.
Yeah.
So, uh, right early days one of my first theatre jobs was for a company called Q20 Theatre, and it was a small touring company which did various plays here, there, and everywhere, but also they did shows for schools and shows for this, that, and the other. And you know, and I'd been working them for quite a while, and the director of the company said, "Oh, I'm not sure what we should be doing next," you know. And I said, "Well, I'll write it." And that's literally what happened. I would volunteer to write things. I didn't get paid, but I would write them and we'd do them. And that's how I really started writing. And then the very first thing I got paid for, which is not, I know it's not a massive thing in the US, but it's a massive thing in the UK, which is pantomime. And I was working in another theatre company, and they were looking for the right pantomime for that season. I was doing the season there, and uh, and I said, "Oh, it's all right, I'll write it," because I could fit it in with the cast and everything. And I got paid. I know exactly how much I got paid. I got paid £70 for it, which is what $50 or something like that. And that was my first writing pay package.
There you go. Um, so when
So
you were writing,
I always did write. It was just
yeah,
uh, I never thought of it as a career, and then it gradually took over. To be honest, that's what
yeah.
happened.
So when you were writing, for BBC and on these various shows, did you have like creative liberty to write whatever you wanted, or would they say, "Hey, we want an episode that's got some family drama and but you can kind of put your own spin on it," or would you have guidelines that you had to follow, or was it all what your own creativity?
Well, it started off as my own creativity. You know, you start off, and that's how you break in because you write and you show people, and eventually they either commission it or they don't. In my case, they eventually commissioned it, which was obviously a totally original piece of drama, which was a thriller called Dog in the Dark. And that's how I started. And through that, I got a literary agent who represented me, and it was her who said to me, they said, if you want to really earn a living on this in this business, you know, you might look to writing on other people's shows. Uh, and I'd never thought of that. I'd never even thought about writing on anybody else's show. I just assumed I'd always do what I wanted to do, and that was it. Uh, but in a strange way, there was a lot of odd things that happened. One thing that happened was the other thing she actually said to me. Again, the literary agent said, and also you might want to think about writing for radio. And I said, well, no, I don't really particularly want to write for radio. I'm not really get it. But I was also directing in theatre at the time. And I was directing a show in North London. And I was driving home and I listened to something on the radio, which was a thing on a Capital Radio, which is a local London radio station, that said, which had a thing called, well, it had about the very first talk show on that I'd ever heard of. There might have been lots more in the States before then, but in England, this was the only one I knew of. And I used to like listen to it because again, it was like an insight into another world a lot of the time. And if you are writing, you like to get these sort of insights into various things. And I was listening to this, and this awful story came on about this girl, and she was on the end of the phone crying, and
Okay.
uh, yeah, yeah. So it was my literary agent who said, "Why don't you actually try writing on radio?" There was a regular play slots on the BBC radio, which were quite prestigious as well to get, and it was quite good. But I hadn't thought of actually writing on radio, and I decided that it wasn't really for me. But I was driving home one night, and there was this radio show on called Anna Raeburn and the Capital Dock, and it was the only phone-in show I was aware of in the UK at the time, and it gave you an insight into lots of different walks of life and everything. And this girl was on, and she was crying, and she was in a terrible state because her boyfriend horrendously had just tried to abort her with a kitchen knife, and this Anna Raeburn on the other end of the line saying, "It's all right, darling. Don't worry, darling. We'll sort it out, darling." And it was going on. And I at the time was thinking, "You just tell me where you are, and I'll come and grab you and take you to hospital." You know what I mean? And obviously they don't give out addresses or anything, so that was wishful thinking on my part. But then she kept saying her dad was coming home and he'd be drunk and she didn't know what to do and all this sort of thing. And this whole drama was building on the radio I was listening to. And then suddenly this presenter went, "All right, darling, don't worry, darling. We'll sort this out for you. Wait there just a minute because we're going to go to a commercial break." And I thought, wow, you can't go to, leaving this poor girl in the commercial break. And I thought I just got to write a play about this. So I wrote a radio play about a relationship actually with a male uh, phoning guy and a girl at the other end who had her own troubles and problems. But it was actually uh, contrasted against his own family life where he was having problems and he didn't even realize he was having those sort of problems. So it was this thing. I sent it to my agent. She sent it straight to the BBC and it got commissioned straight away. So that I started doing radio, and it was from that radio play that then I got a phone call about from again through my agent about East Eight, which was a new bi-weekly drama which was being done by the BBC, which was the working title for EastEnders. And that is how I literally became involved in writing on series and serials drama. And in those cases, you're always given storylines and things like that. In those days, you had a lot more freedom than you do now. I mean, I have stopped sort of about 10 years ago, stopped writing on series and serials because they've become so formulaic and become so restrictive that in what you can or you can't do. In those early days, certainly of EastEnders, it was a very liberal, very free thinking, very creative atmosphere, very much nearer to the writers' room in America than anything else I've ever worked on in England. The writers' room in America have that idea that you're all working on the same show. Well, a lot of the times that's not the case in England. It feels at times that you're all working on separate shows, and I don't think that's really good for the piece.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it was just one of those things. I'd had other jobs offered at the time, but that one really appealed to me. It seemed to be the one that I found was really exciting and interesting, and
So
it was the best.
is that why you started writing novels? Because you didn't want to write shows anymore, so you figured you'd start writing some novels?
Well, I'd always wanted to write a novel, and I won't bore you with a lot of stories about every time I tried to write a novel, something happened, and so something major always blew up in my life, so I couldn't do it. And it was partly coupled with that, yes, that I thought I need the space, I need the time to do it, and I'd never had the time before that. I was always, literally going from one TV show to another, and it's very hard to find the time to actually sit down and write a novel. And I thought if I stop writing those, it doesn't mean I stopped writing for TV. I haven't stopped writing for TV, but I only do what I want to do now, as opposed to I would constantly be almost on the treadmill nearly. You know what I mean? I didn't mind it. I enjoyed it. I loved it, and it was a terrific thing. But I just suddenly thought, no, this is the time to stop. I started not enjoying it, to be honest, Alex. I started to thinking I'm not enjoying this anymore. For all those reasons you talk about, it becomes very, very prescriptive, too prescriptive. You need to be able to bring something to it, or what is the point of it, if it
Right.
almost, you
Yeah.
know. So that's when I did, yeah, and I started to write novels, which I love doing because I don't have anybody breathing down my neck, not until I finish the novel and then send it into the editor, and then they breathe down your neck.
Yeah. Just a different stage, a
Yeah,
different part, they're not breathing down your neck while you're writing, but once you
yeah,
finish, they tell you what they want you to change or what's going to sell and whatnot.
yeah, yeah.
So I wanted to talk a little bit too about Shakespeare. I mean, because you've had a long career in theater, and I know over here in the States, through school, kids you have to read. We all read Romeo and Juliet, Midsummer Night's Dream, Hamlet, Macbeth, going through high school, and I feel like a lot of kids don't appreciate Shakespeare. Maybe they're too young to really understand it and appreciate it. I always enjoyed Shakespeare's drama, or not his dramas, his comedies, like Midsummer Night's Dream, Much Ado About Nothing. I wasn't a fan of the dramas as much. Um, but do you have a favorite Shakespeare play?
Probably, it's probably Othello.
Okay.
I'm probably the opposite to you, Alex. I love the tragedies. I really love the tragedies. But I suppose, in a strange way, virtually everything I write is a tragedy for some reason. I don't know why. I'm not, I do. I think there's comedy elements in things I write, but I wouldn't say I was a comedy writer. And things I do write are quite dark and yeah. So the whole Shakespearean tragedy thing, I just love. We have a thing called A levels, advanced levels here, which you do at school, And I remember doing Othello then, and I just thought it was such a brilliant piece about envy and jealousy, and it's tragic. It's so
Yeah.
tragic. But I love Midsummer Night's Dream as well, and I love Taming the Shrew, and a lot, yeah, and I think you're absolutely right about. I think it's very difficult because I can understand a lot of kids not actually wanting to enjoy Shakespeare. I think it's not necessarily the teacher's fault. It is sometimes quite difficult to get into. But if you get into the stories of them, the stories are just brilliant. I mean, Romeo and Juliet is just got to be one of the best love stories ever, ever, ever made, because it's all about young love. And if you think about teaching that in school, I mean, what kid at 14 or 15 hasn't, been enamored with male, female, whatever, you know what I mean? And have that
Yeah.
learning and would go to that nth degree for them, and that is the age you do it. That's the time you do it, and that's the time you understand it. And I think Shakespeare was, I think like you, I think he was just an amazing writer. I mean, he was so eclectic. I mean, as you mentioned, the comedies and the tragedies and the history plays. I mean, it's a massive, massive amount of work, and it's just brilliantly a mixture of work as well. And you just think, if you can get into it, it's just really worth the effort, I think. Because once you do, I think, if you once you get into Shakespeare, you do, like you say, you just really grow to love it and enjoy
Yeah.
it and enjoy the stories.
Yeah, he's a genius. I mean, the characters, he's created so many wonderful characters, so many evil villains, and
Yeah,
I mean, some of the worst villains, in literature Shakespeare created, and like we talked about, I mean, just the range, right? Some people only can write comedies or only write, but he could do it all.
yeah,
And there's been such an impact on other literature and other films, and so much stuff is because of Shakespeare. Um, and yeah, I feel like kids don't appreciate that. I was lucky enough, we had a travel club when I was in high school, and we went to England, Ireland, and Wales, and we went to Stratford upon Avon, and we got to see his birthplace, and got to see all of the attractions there and the history, and it was wonderful. I thought it was great to go there. I'd love to go back and to actually see a play there at the theater, and I think it'd be wonderful.
which amazing enough, I went the first time I went to Stratford upon Avon was at school. It was a school trip,
Yeah,
and I think I must have been 16 or something like that. And we went and we saw Troilus and Cressida there, and I was just blown away. Do you know what I mean? It was just
yeah,
like fantastic. And there you were in what was like the Mecca for if you cared, if you like drama, it was a wonderful thing. And I loved, like you, I loved all the history of Anne Hathaway's cottage and all those sort of things. And it's just great, and how he turned out that amount of work, it's so consistently brilliant. It's just phenomenal, really.
yeah,
And we should carry on with it in school, I think. And if we
yeah.
can find ways of teaching it in a way that people actually hooked into those stories, and then so that the language, because I think it's the language that the kids have struggled with. And if we could just, sort of almost not bypass the language, but explain that behind that language is some great stories that everybody should enjoy, really. You know,
Yeah.
better than any
Yeah.
video game.
Yeah. No, there's a better plot to the Shakespeare than there is to whatever new video game you're cranked out that you know.
Exactly. I mean, when you talk about, and that's why I suppose I love Othello. I didn't love Iago, but I love the character Iago. I mean, such a clever villain. Do you know what I mean? He's
Yeah.
so brilliantly, awful about the way he manipulates the whole situation, and that's terrific villain writing, isn't it?
Yeah. It is. It really is. Those are people always talk about, different villains throughout history, but in film and in literature and whatnot, and there are certain ones that get talked about more than others, but I feel like they don't dive into Shakespeare and, plays and that side of it either as much. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah, it's something that I feel like you're right. If you get past the language barrier that kids struggle with understanding and reading, it doesn't obviously read as smooth for a young kid. But if you get past that, just right down to what the plot of the story is, what the characters are, and you can really enjoy it. And there's some great film adaptations for most of them. They're all
yeah.
wonderful, productions with phenomenal actors in it, and yeah, it's all good stuff.
Yeah, yeah, I know. There are some really good films, Shakespearean films now, I suppose you also, for me, seeing it live in the theatre is terrific as well. It's really really great.
Yeah, yeah,
And obviously we're pretty lucky in the UK because we have the Shakespearean Company, the Royal Shakespeare Company, as you know, in Stratford. So you can have a chance to see good Shakespeare, whatever, which is
right.
terrific.
Yeah, everything is better live. When we were over there, we got to see a production. We saw Mamma Mia, a Broadway production of Mamma Mia at oh, what the heck was that theater called in London? Novello Theater, I think it was called. Um,
The novella. Yeah.
yeah, we
Yeah.
saw
They have a
Mamma Mia
novella.
there.
Yeah.
And the movies are great, and I love the movies, but once you've seen it live, it just doesn't compare. The
Yeah.
live production is so much better.
Yeah. Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, yeah. I've seen Mamma Mia a few times because I get invited to see actors perform and things. And because it's been running that long, you get actors going in and saying, "Oh look, I'm doing such and such in Mamma Mia. Will you come along? Well, I'll get you some tickets and things like that." So I've seen that show quite a few times now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Awesome.
I also, fully enough, worked with the stage manager on that show. The girl called Annie who worked on a show that I directed a couple of years back. And she took time off to work on our show, but she's been on that show. She must have been on it 7 or 8 years or something. You know what I mean? It's just like a whole world for her.
Yeah.
The Mamma Mia, the Mamma Mia world.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I've loved Mamma Mia. I heard they're making another movie. So I'd be interested to see if that's true or if they're just rumors.
Mamma Mia 3, as it were.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it
Yeah.
spawned off my love for ABBA, the music of ABBA. I've always they're my favorite band now. On ever since I saw Mamma Mia, I've just loved their music, all of it. Not just the hits that you hear on the radio, but if you actually take a deep dive into their music, I love it all.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what a great bit of marketing, the whole thing. You know what I mean? The whole ABBA phenomena is just amazing, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the pop quiz question is, do you know where they won the Eurovision Song Contest originally?
No.
Uh, Because that's how they came to fame, through the Eurovision Song Contest. Oh, they
Yeah.
won it in Brighton in England. It's like one of those weird facts.
Yeah.
You could not many, well, lots of people suppose came from Brighton, but it was like a strange place to win the Eurovision Song Contest for some reason.
Yeah. Yeah. I've
And
got this little uh book of facts. I haven't read it yet, but it's the little guide to ABBA, all these little
oh wow,
facts. So
I bet
maybe
it's
it's
in
in
there.
there. I just haven't read it yet.
Yeah, I bet it's in there. It's got to be in there. Good. I think Waterloo, wasn't it? Was it Waterloo, their very first
Yeah,
one? Yeah,
yeah, good stuff.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, Tony, I appreciate you coming on and battling the technology with me, and I'll piece it together, and it'll end up being good. But I'm glad we were able to chat.
Yeah, I am so sorry about the technology and everything, but
Not your fault.
and it's been really nice to meet you and talk. It's been a nice way to spend an afternoon.
Thanks for listening. Please stay tuned for more episodes soon.